Hello, my name is Ebony Bea, and today I'm going to be introducing you to my research on the association between social ecological factors and initial engagement with substance abuse treatment. First, let me introduce you to my research topic and why I wanted to research this topic in the first place. Addiction is a growing problem in the United States that negatively impacts many individuals, their relationships, communities, and society as a whole. Here in this graph, you can see that drug overdose deaths have increased significantly since 1999, with over 100,000 people dying from a drug overdose in 2021. Additionally, there are high rates of relapse and dropout for addiction treatment, with some research finding that less than 50% of people enrolled in addiction treatment successfully complete that treatment across all types of addiction treatment. Considering this, a deeper understanding of factors that influence initial engagement with addiction treatment is of value. I'm interested in what makes people more or less likely to enroll in treatment in the first place or initial engagement, as this is an understudied aspect of addiction treatment. In order to understand factors that predict initial engagement with addiction treatment, I'm going to be using a social ecological framework. This framework looks at human development as existing within a sort of ecosystem with many different factors influencing a person's development. Research shows that social, cultural, environmental, and biological factors are all known to influence the etiology of substance use disorders, as seen by this study, for example, which is showing risk factors for opioid misuse. And the complexity of addiction makes it a very difficult thing to effectively treat. For my study, I will specifically be looking at the individual and interpersonal levels of the social ecological model, as addiction research using this model shows that these levels of factors are most important, at least in regard to risk factors and prevention efforts. And based on the literature, I have two hypotheses. The first being that both individual level and interpersonal level factors significantly predict initial engagement with substance abuse treatment. And then my second hypothesis is that individual level factors more strongly predict initial engagement with addiction treatment than interpersonal level factors. Now, getting into my methods for this study, I used a secondary data set from 2019 titled Wellbeing and Basic Needs Survey. This survey had a representative sample of people from the United States who were asked a lot of census type questions as well as substance use questions. My final sample ended up being 2,366. The inclusion criteria was people who answered that they, a family member, or close friend ever had an addiction. My age range was 18 to 64, with the mean age being 44.8 years of age and the standard deviation being 3.2. The majority of my participants identified their race or ethnicity as white. 69.9% identified as white, 13.7% Hispanic, 9.8% Black, 4.2% were two or more races, and then 2.4% identified as other. For my measures, I had three predictors with three levels of factors. The first were my demographics, which included age, education, race, ethnicity, gender, household income, and region that the participants lived in. My second predictor was individual level factors, including physical and mental health, employment status, and whether or not they had insurance. My final predictor was interpersonal level factors, which was marital status, number of children, and family size for this study. My outcome variable is initial engagement, which I defined as participants answered that they had enrolled in any type of treatment before for drug addiction, including counseling, medication, outpatient treatment, detoxification, inpatient services, transitional housing, or any other type of treatment. My statistical analysis plan includes doing a binary logistic regression with three models that build on top of one another. My first model is just testing demographics and how that predicts my outcome of initial engagement. My second model is demographics and individual factors. And my third is demographics, individual factors, and interpersonal factors. And my significance level is going to be 0.05. I'm still in the process of conducting my analyses and doing interpreting those results, but I do have some values of interest as well as some predictions. For my p-values, I'm going to be looking at significant differences between models 1 and 2, as well as between models 2 and 3, and then significant variables within each model. I'm going to be looking at R-squared and McFadden values as well to see how well does each model fit the data. My predictions, I'm predicting that all three models will be significant, meaning demographics, individual factors, and interpersonal factors will all predict initial engagement with addiction treatment. However, I predict that there will be a more significant difference between models 1 and 2 than models 2 and 3. Meaning demographics and individual factors will better predict initial engagement with addiction treatment. And finally, for model 2, I predict that it will have a higher R-squared value, meaning that demographics and individual factors will explain initial engagement with treatment better than it would when we add in those interpersonal level factors. Now, finally, for my discussion, some strengths of my study include that I used a nationally representative sample and that my sample is unique, as I used the social ecological model to look at initial engagement specifically, whereas a lot of research focuses on prevention efforts, risk factors, long-term engagement, or relapse. Some limitations of my study include the way that I define certain variables, particularly my initial engagement variable was limited, as I didn't have any info on why engagement was stopped or when it stopped, just whether or not they had enrolled in that treatment. Then other variables such as household income were limited. Household income was included as a individual level factor because I did not have individual income, and that's just due to the data that I had access to at the time. Some implications of my study. My findings will have significant clinical and mental health service implications to improve our ability to identify factors of substance use treatment engagement. And hopefully it will encourage future research on targeted engagement improvement interventions. Some future directions that I'm interested in. Definitely a higher quality of interpersonal measures, as only 3 were included in this particular study. More specific initial engagement measures to address those limitations in my study, and then looking at specific types of treatment for drug addiction to see how different factors might influence different types of treatment differently rather than treatment as a whole. I'd like to acknowledge all the help that I got from the UCLA Trust Lab. In particular, I'd like to thank my advisor and mentors, Rudy Mudlar and Lauren Ng. And then finally, I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.